Hey everyone, this is Meg and welcome to another Last Gen review. Today I'm going to be finally talking about Primal. An ordinary girl, a realm of demons, and an epic conflict between primal forces. I think that pretty much sums it up. The story is actually quite unusual in its tone. It borders on a fantasy-style epic, with a semi-religious feel through the characters of Abaddon and Arella, but it's quite gothic. The ambience is quite gothic. And there's a kind of strain of really clever comedy running throughout. And the main protagonist, Jen, is quite an unusual female heroine, I think. She's spunky and edgy, with a real cool attitude, but she's also caring and kind. That really comes through. And though I liked the character of Jen, I mean, she is the main protagonist after all, in my opinion it's Scree who steals the show. He's the Giles to this Buffy. And I love his tone, the tone of his voice, I mean. It's wise and fatherly. But the voice actors bring so much to the roles, and is it really any wonder? Because Jen is voiced by Hudson Like, who played Callisto in Xena Warrior Princess, if any of you are familiar with that show. And Scree is voiced by Andreas Katsoulis, who played Jakar in Babylon 5, and sadly passed away in 2006. But other notable actors, such as Sean Pertwee and Colin McFarlane, occupy the cast list as well. And while I'm actually on this note, Hudson and Andreas actually got to work together in the same booth. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that it really does make all the difference if you allow actors to really kind of physically bounce off each other, instead of separating them and sort of splicing the audio together later, or matching the audio together later. And I realise now I've said that, I make it sound like they physically bounce off of each other. I don't mean it like that. The writing is incredibly witty. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's not purely comedic, and it's not slapstick either. It's the smart kind of comedy, but the light-heartedness doesn't take away from the serious parts of the story. I mean, I would say that Primal story is one of the most unique things about the game. There's great character development there, great plot twists and turns and reveals as well. I won't go too much into that. And the central duo of Jen and Scree really do carry the whole thing. Okay, it's really depressing to me how a game with a few real gameplay issues can surpass most modern video games in challenge and length. I mean, it's the common belief nowadays that linearity is a bad thing. Bottom line, Primal disproves this. Levels, though they're linear, are expansive and full of things to find, pathways to create, puzzles to solve, and battles to fight. And part of what makes this game so challenging is figuring out the one linear pathway that you should be taking. Primal's also a great example of unbeatable to me to you gameplay and AI mechanics. Using the select button on the PlayStation controller, you can switch from Jen to Scree at just the right moments, and both characters bring their own uses to the game, and they're both incredibly helpful. I mean, Scree alone carries torches, to light your way. It absorbs energies, charges health, opens doorways, he climbs up stone walls as well, and turns to stone himself, and that is only the tip of the iceberg. The gameplay is also littered with some really, really unique elements. When Jen dies, for example, it's not the end. In the event of Jen's death, the player immediately takes on the role of Scree, and you have to find a rift gate, which also, now that I'm on that subject, transports you to areas that you've already visited, which is quite nifty, and thought you wanted to know that. So when you find a rift gate, you summon her back and go right back to what you were doing before, which is pretty awesome. Jen also earns kind of different forms as the game progresses, which grant her unique abilities to get through the different worlds that Scree and Jen explore. It's kind of like Sora and the gang in Kingdom Hearts. And those are pretty impressive pros, but now for the cons. Combat is frustrating, not because of the overall level of difficulty, but because it's downright awkward. To fight, the player has to press L1, L2 and R2, whilst using R1 to block. And by pressing the X button, it shifts the lock-on feature to different enemies. Now, using these buttons is not completely unheard of, but it convolutes the gameplay and hinders the combat overall in Primal, I think. And combat also restricts you to either planning your moves very carefully or button mashing to overpower the enemy, neither of which always works. It doesn't help matters that these attacks always take like a second or two to impact. Drawing enemies away from the pack, sort of lining them up and knocking them down, is a good way to approach combat situations, I've found, so there's a helpful tip for you if you plan on playing Primal. But all in all, the combat situations filled me with dread, and I'll let you decide if that's a good or a bad thing. There were some minor problems with character switches too. You had to make sure that your other was behind you at all times, otherwise you risk leaving Jen or Scream miles behind only to realise this after you've switched. I found this out the hard way and I really wouldn't recommend it. So all in all, the combat is Primal's biggest downfall. But the incredible partner AI and inventive gameplay mechanics, not to mention hours of immersive and challenging play, make up for it, no question. The camera and graphics are bumpy, clunky, and generally dizzying, which doesn't sound like much, but it is such a problem in levels like Aquas, for example, when swimming is made infinitely harder because the camera just doesn't know what it wants to do. It could have been smoother. I do, however, love the visual style of Primal. The range of vastly different levels in game added some real creative diversity in the look and feel. I mean, you have Solum, try saying that 3 times fast, which is an almost kind of medieval style, rocky, snow-covered area. You have an underwater world home to these hulking mechanical structures. You have a dark gothic place divided into sort of Tudor-like peasant streets and places of high aristocracy. Volca is a wasted place of burning rock and hot lava. So I would say I'm 50-50. I love the art style because it really helps Primal stand out from so many other action-adventure titles of the same strain, but the visual and camera quality is so poor, I would go so far as to say that it's an eyesore. I'm less 50-50 on the soundtrack and more 80-20. It's an odd mix of 2 very different styles and one I much preferred over the other. On the one hand, you have some really surprising orchestral and choral pieces. Tracks like Jen Meets Arella or Devil's Waltz are really a good example of how delicate and beautifully implemented the score is. There's also some really epic tracks too, like A Love Lost or The Timekeeper. Then during gameplay, you have these obnoxious sounding battle tracks, which is just a constant thrum of heavy metal with no melody or beat. Now, there are some rock, metal, grunge songs in the soundtrack, like Alkali, which are really fantastic, but I feel like the soundtrack could have done without the battle tunes that worked so well in other games, like The Darkness, but really don't add anything to Primal except maybe a headache. I've actually purchased this soundtrack. I got it on iTunes.co.uk, which made a nice surprise that I could even find it at all, let alone on iTunes. As I said though, the battle tracks are really ear-splitting, for me personally, but the orchestral and choral pieces and metal grunge songs are really worth buying the whole album in my opinion. Overall, Primal is a last generation gem that really shouldn't be missed. Yes, the game is hard work, yes, the combat is unuser-friendly at best, but the intriguing story, the great voice work, not to mention the best example of AI mechanics that I've seen to date, unique gameplay features, beautiful score, distinctive visual style, they all make Primal a worthy endeavour. This is a game that, considering its kind of dizzy visual quality, could really benefit, I think, from a high definition remastering, but I doubt it'll ever get the treatment it deserves. So thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the review. Please feel free to leave your own comments and opinions on Primal in the comment section below. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye! Like Alkali. Like Alkali. Definitely not right. Definitely not right, man. It's the common belief nowadays that linearity, there was a word in there somewhere, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I sure did. Linearity. Why can't I say linearity? No, it's the common, no. Who coincidentally, whew, it's fizzy. Bottom line, Primal's just, combat section. A game with a few, primal how I... It's gonna take hours, but we'll get there.